Is that not the most Christian intro you've ever heard?
I was really confused, actually.
Well, you've never seen one of my response streams before, Christian?
Well, maybe I'm outing myself as not a true Exploring Reality fan, but no, I've never
Wow,
seen
you were
that
talking
before.
Exploring Reality up on an interview.
Well, I watch your other stuff, but response videos, I just must have missed them.
It's all fun.
Yeah, we weren't on any of your other response videos, so they were a cut below the rest. That's not just kidding.
Fair enough.
True.
All right, guys. Well, welcome to Exploring Reality. Thanks for coming to join us in this impromptu stream. I was not planning on this, hence why I still have a bunch of meat on my plate here. But we're going to be responding to a guy named Mindshift. Go check out his YouTube channel. I have the link to the original video in the description. Gives some thoughtful content. He's new, but he's growing very quickly. I've had a number of people ask me to respond to him. Somebody sent me this video, and then I just kind of like reached out to a bunch of friends and was like, hey, you guys got time in like 30 minutes to do something? And then this is the crew. So real quick here,
this is what he could scrounge together in a few minutes. This is just bottom of the barrel. Just I gotta not the A team here.
This is the A team. Everybody's the A team.
We're at least the C team, but
right.
Okay, well, really quick. In Philosopher's Garb, why don't you introduce yourself? Then we'll go to Christian James, and then Dr. Plantiga's Bulldog. I changed your name to Dr. Plantiga's Bulldog.
I didn't notice that. I was like, what happened?
It's because you're a theologian, remember?
Okay, yeah, officially, apparently.
Go ahead and introduce you guys, and then we'll get started here in a bit.
Yeah, so my title is In Philosopher's Garb. I also go by James. I have a YouTube channel and a TikTok where I have mostly done response videos and done stuff regarding Christian apologetics. Recently, I've been kind of moving more towards theological discussions, which is pretty appropriate considering the topic of this video. So yeah, happy to be here.
Me, right? That's me next.
Yeah, I don't care.
Yeah, I'm a linguistic student, and I really like theology and Jesus.
Nice.
I'm not a student in anything. I just like to research. My name's Kyle. I've been around the block before, but and I just like to study philosophy and stuff like that. And that's about it.
And you do pull-ups.
I do pull-ups apparently.
Oh, yeah, you got a little pull-up arm.
At one time, I could do like a bunch of them, and now I'm lazy. So
it's funny.
That's why I research and don't don't be buff like Than. That's the difference. Yeah.
I'm not buff anymore. Maybe wait until I'm done with my surgeries. Somebody in the chat just said eating steak with coffee is diabolical. I have steak in my mouth right now. Ready for this?
Gratuitous evil.
Yeah, I was gonna
say. I've suffered immeasurably from seeing that.
Okay. Real quick here, just a friendly reminder to everybody watching. We are in the middle of trying to just build some more support for Exploring Reality so I can do this full time, get you more frequent videos, better edited videos, more research, all that stuff, classes, yada, yada, yada. So just please consider joining the Patreon here. There's tons of little tiers. You guys get little perks, all that jazz. The link to do that is in my link tree and in the description of the video. So just please consider doing that. Every little bit helps. Do you guys have Patreons? Okay. Well, if they did, I would tell you to go support them too. Cool. So, let's just pull up the video here. His video is called Problems with Paradise, 7 Reasons Why Heaven Fails. And he has, I think it was, 7 problems. So I figured what we'll do is just kind of listen through the problems. You guys can tell me when to stop and pause.
All of my notes are on the first 3 minutes. So
I know.
I'm going to have to throw all those away.
I stopped taking notes after, I think the second problem. I didn't watch the rest. So
we're doing it live, boys.
I have no notes, so it'll be fine. This is the people want impromptu. We'll give them impromptu. All right, here we go.
Let's start off simple and with a really easy one. How about just eternal monotony? I'm talking boredom. I'm talking the very first thought most of us had as kids when we heard about heaven. Now, some of our parents told us, oh, it's great, you'll be riding flying horses and eating whatever food you like the best and all of these things, but that's not the reality. Many of us were told about the worship part, that we would endlessly, eternally be worshiping God. Now, maybe some of that are correlating worship incorrectly, and we thought of the praise and worship parts of service at church, and we thought, oh, I don't want to do that forever. Maybe worshiping God is just living perfectly. Maybe that brings glory to him. But the actual descriptions we get of worship are closer to the first one. They are about songs that are sang, instruments that are played, our bodily position of being bent over and bowed down, etc. That does not sound fun. But Brandon, you don't understand. We'll be filled with the light. We'll be filled with God's presence. We'll be right there. We'll be compelled to do nothing else. There will be no greater thing you could do for eternity than praise God. I'm going to skip the narcissistic parts of how ridiculous it is that this God who wants a relationship with us
pause it real quick.
An goal where the
Sorry, he's got a little mini rant.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
But train of thought just derailed right as I asked you to pause it. That's how it works, isn't it?
I mean, I was going to ask to pause
him
too,
saying
so.
it's narcissistic.
Well, why don't you go first, James, and maybe I'll actually remember what I was going to say.
Yeah, so I guess the things that immediately come to my mind is like, okay, well, what you may have been told heaven is going to be like by a normal, everyday, random Christian, that's not necessarily the same thing as what actual Judaic Christian thought about what heaven or eternity is going to be like. And so I think probably one of the most fruitful things that we can do at the beginning of this is because from what I've seen of this already, like a recurring theme or a recurring error that he commits is just to completely misrepresent what eternity is like under a Christian theology. So heaven, Christian theology does not say, hey, you get to go to heaven. And the great thing about that is that you get to sing forever. So first off, the eternal hope of Christians is not to be in this heavenly immaterial realm for eternity. It's to be embodied in the universe, in the new earth and the new heavens, and to be participating in the governorship of that, to be stewards of, to rule over creation. So in scripture, in Hebrews, we're told that we are to be the ones whom creation is to be subject to. The idea is that God created humans with the goal of us being stewards of all creation, and that's what we're getting back to for in eternity. That's what the redemptive plan is we're going to be getting back to basics. And so that, yeah, I mean, like, that's not to deny that there's going to be worship, because if you love God, you're going to want to do that anyways, but it's much more than that. It's also like ruling the cosmos, which sounds pretty banger to me. Like, that sounds pretty great.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think too, like, I think it's important to realize, like, there are so many different strands of, Christian theology throughout the church, and so much diversity, and not just that there's diversity and disagreement, but that there's, like, I think room for that disagreement as well. Like, it's not unreasonable to have that disagreement. And so you described what I think is a roughly, Augustinian picture of the fall and redemption. But if you're a bit more of an Irenaean like I am, then you might think that, it's not just a redemption, that heaven is, the process, life is the process of us, gaining in our moral growth and being more like God and learning to love the things that God does and participate in the things that God does, which of course are objectively the best things too. So there's that alongside with it. And then of course, heaven is just the completion of that cycle, or a climatic arc of that cycle, where we are on the final road to perfection, or where we are finally perfected. And so, these are very rich ideas that are, not bound up in sort of these more myopic notions of, we'll be singing and playing music and worshiping God in that way. Two more things. Briefly. The first one is he has, I think it's important to note that, like, Revelation as a book is
apocalyptic literature.
Yeah, it is apocalyptic literature. It is deeply laced with a bunch of metaphor and other things like that, and imagery and stuff like that. Now, the immediate thing that he would probably say is like, oh, so it's not true, or we don't have to take it seriously. That is irrelevant. The point is that when we are taking on a genre of literature that is using metaphor and imagery and other things deeply, it's important to assess it in that way, as opposed to assessing it like we might assess a 21st century history book, right? So that is also important. So maybe we'll find if we actually assess it that way, that, for instance, the imagery of worshiping God by singing and bowing down is not as narrow as all that, but maybe it does meet with a wider berth of, you know, us simply glorifying God by being like God is and stuff like that. So that is just sort of a thing that ought to be thought about and looked into. And then the last tiny thing is, and there's a few times where he brings this up in the video, but he has the part about boredom, and then he's like, oh, but your parents tell you, like, you know, God is going to be like that great that you are going to enjoy it for eternity. And he doesn't really, now I want to say straightforward that, like, I don't think that that's right. I don't think that that's why heaven is good and is enjoyable forever. It's just because, like, God is that good per se. I don't think it's like just this like overwhelming euphoric experience that washes over you, and that's why you'll enjoy it for infinite amounts in an infinite amount of time. But he doesn't ever, that I see, present a good argument to think that it's not. So I'm sort of left like, well, you just kind of said that it wasn't. So I already agree with you, so that helps you. But I don't think anyone that actually thinks that will be persuaded to think that you've given much good reason to think that that's false. So
yeah.
I will add, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, please, James, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I want to add on, because that's a good point that you mentioned that, because so I opened my critique by talking about, like, well, it's not just, you know, sitting around and singing praises and being in God's presence. Like, I think there's other, you know, kind of cosmos governing things that humans are going to be doing. But, like, even if it's just us all gathered around the divine bonfire singing silly songs, like, that's, you know, like, if you've ever experienced God's presence, like, you would understand how much of a banger that sounds like. Like, there are a handful of times in my life where I have been surprised to be, you know, experiencing what I think is God's presence. And it was sudden and it was overwhelming and it washed over me. And feeling that for eternity sounds pretty great. And if this is coming from an individual who has never, you know, felt God's presence, has never had love wash over him, like, you know, water washes over you, and to experience that, like, okay, like, I can maybe see why it's difficult for him to understand why just being in the presence of God would be something that is highly desirable. But to all of us who have experienced that, we're chasing that dragon.
Yeah, I think just one thing to add on that, because you both did a great job of laying out some perspectives on that. What I'm interested in here is whether or not this is an internal critique, whether or not it's the case that Christians are incoherent to say that we would enjoy the beatitudes of heaven and everything that comes with it, or if this is some sort of externalist view where, you know, it seems boring to worship God for eternity, or it seems like it would be sort of mundane and dull. And I think outside the Christian perspective, that's probably right. I mean, given the context of theosis and what it means to be perfected, it's like, it probably is the case that unless we're speaking from an internalist perspective of what it means to be a Christian in heaven, it probably makes some sense to say that it's not all that interesting. The Christian idea would be that it becomes interesting by virtue of our association with the divine continually. So I think there's sort of a mistake there to conflate what seems uninteresting from the secular perspective to what the Christian is actually committed to.
That's a good point.
Keep talking really quick so I can finish chewing my steak. And there's one point I wanted to make.
So
Yep.
Silly Songs with Larry for eternity. I'm down with you, James. That would be thebomb.com. Let's go.
I think it's gonna be great. I mean, something that we were talking about that was like, also, it's just, so he talks a lot about boredom and monotony, and this first point, like, it's kind of what he's harping on. But I think he's maybe underestimating the degree to which, like, why do we feel boredom? Is this something because of it's a flaw of our current, you know, psychological state? Because if so, and our, you know, psychological states and our neurophysical states are going to be fixed of any flaws, well, then boredom isn't even a thing that we'll be able to. I mean, so he's describing, it's almost circular and ridiculous that he's making this argument, because boredom is in itself kind of a form of suffering and a form of pain. And he's already granted that this is going to be a place of no suffering and no pain. So it's like, okay, yeah, I grant you that you're not going to have any suffering or pain, but you're going to have this type of suffering. It's like, no. You've already granted me there's no suffering. So.
Yeah.
Good point.
He did say one thing right before we paused, which is just like he kind of made that typical like, well, it's narcissistic for God to command worship or want worship or any of that stuff. And one, I think the Christian can contest whether or not God is actually commanding worship. But even if we granted that, Frederick Chu just has a really good paper that I always recommend everybody read on this topic, which is kind of worship. Worthy agent command others to worship. And he does a really good job of defending. I don't know if you guys have read this paper, but for anybody interested in that point, I just recommend reading this because he's just making this right here, the egotistical objection. And yeah, I just really recommend reading that paper. I think he does a really good job addressing that kind of an objection. And I just don't think it's not really related to problem one, but he makes it within this little clip here. And I just thought it was important to address. That's all.
Yeah, that's good. And I mean, I guess I'll tag on a comment to that. It's like, okay, well, like why, if God did command us to worship him, or if worshiping him is something we're encouraged to do, or we do, why that? Or does that make him narcissistic? And something that this guy and pretty much everyone who raises this objection fails to miss is that worshiping God can be for our benefit. So I think it's C.S. Lewis talks about, like, if you love something, part of the completion of that love is sharing it with others. Like if you hear a really good joke, but you don't have anyone to tell it to, that's less enjoyable than if you get to tell that joke to someone. Or if I read a really good book, I might run to, my wife or run to Than and be like, dude, I just read this thing. It's so good. And like share it with him. And part of the sharing of it is the enjoyment of it. Or even more simply, like just telling someone that you love them. Like that's part of the process of love. And it's good.
Yeah.
Like if you love someone, expressing that love, it isn't just for them to hear and for them to feel good. It's also for you. Like it's good for you to express that love.
I was just gonna say,
yeah.
I was just like, I'm. Is anybody else? Oh, you're married too, James. James, right? So like, you get it, maybe a little bit. Like my love language is touch. Like, and one of the best ways to like tell my wife, even though her thing is like acts of service and all that stuff. Like one of the best ways for me to love her in a way that actually is like good for me too is just to give her a hug. It's not because like just for her benefit, it's also for mine, because it's like there's something good about letting the other person know that you love them. And so my wife also would just accept the hug even though she's not a physical touch person, because she knows that it's like a good thing for us and all that jazz. So that's just like an example of that principle extended just to our normal human interactions. Really quick too, Nitty says MS wasn't talking about the literal biblical teaching; he was addressing a popular misconception. So he'd agree with your assessment. So here's my problem with that. I'd much rather believe that wasn't the case. I'd much rather believe that he's presenting what he actually sees Christianity teaching, not the popular misconception. Because if he's just attacking the popular misconception, then he's not
Doesn't
even.
he say explicitly that he's talking about what Scripture says, not necessarily what Christians in general think?
Yeah, that. But I'm also just saying, if we grant what Nitty is saying there, it also just kind of paints him in a dishonest light then, because now you're not even attacking what you think Christianity is, right? You're just attacking a caricature of what's popular right now. Right. You're not saying Christianity's false. You're just saying, here's a problem with the popular misconception, which to me that's just like, well, I'm going to attack this belief that atheists believe everything came from nothing, even though the vast majority of scholarly atheists are all going to deny that. At that point, I'm just attacking a caricature, not something I actually think atheists believe. So you get what I'm trying to say there?
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, because like whenever I hear something that's like, I was like, okay, great, like then why are you making this video? Like, are we supposed to just be impressed that you can knock down an easily, like defeated straw man? Is like, I mean, like I just feel like the way he talks in this video, like it's titled "The Problems with Paradise: 7 Reasons Why Heaven Fails." So just coming into this feels like a general attack on the idea of heaven, and I think he makes more explicit as the video goes on that some of the critiques he's making is just one, it has to do, I mean, he makes certain specific critiques, which we'll see in a second, that are supposed to apply to any idea of anything going on eternally, just infinite in general. And so things like that would not be applicable just to like common misconceptions. So, I mean, I would I would love to be charitable and be like, oh, maybe he's just talking about, pop Christianity. But that's not the vibe I get. I get the vibe that he thinks that he's really found a fatal flaw in the whole, structure of what we got going on here.
Yeah. You guys ready for just problem 2, or do you want to continue problem 1? Is there anything else he says? I don't remember.
And we
Yeah,
got
I don't
7
know.
of these, so I'm down to
Yeah,
jump
I think
forward.
I think we can jump ahead.
Now, a lot of the excuses for this are, again, going back to the you don't understand. We've never been in the very presence of God. We could spend an eternity worshiping him, and it would be amazing. Well, this then leads to that second point that we've already mixed in a little bit, which is slavery. Heaven sounds like eternal submission, right? Can I choose to leave? That would be question number 1. Can I opt out?
What do you guys think there? Like,
when I heard this, I was like, what are you talking about? Like,
well, yeah, I think I want to briefly say this because that is the only thing I have to say on this, which is slavery would be involuntary servitude, and sort of the nature of the Christian story is that someone engages in a voluntary service. I mean, the only way we could say that heaven is slavery if we said is any time anyone engages in any act of service at all, that person is engaging in slavery to the other person. I don't think we'd say that. I think instead what we see is a kind of cooperative service that is called for inside of the entirety of the New Testament. So I don't see this as an imposition by God on our will so that we may not choose to stop serving God. Instead, it's a cooperative effort where we decide that serving God is all we desire to do fundamentally, and that desire is played out ad eternity or ad infinitum, as opposed to an imposition of will.
I'm just pulling something up here because I know this is probably heading in a direction that I've covered in the past. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do.
While Than's pulling that up, I'll just say that I think, Christian, the point you made was good, and it's like the idea of like, well, can I leave? It was like, okay, like let's play this out. It's like, okay, yeah, heaven's is a place where you can leave if you want to. Okay, now what's your objection? The fact that no one will was like, I don't think you're gonna experience heaven and want to leave any more than you experience the flu and you get better and you want to go back to having the flu. Like that's not gonna be, you're not gonna be like, man, I really loved it when I was coughing up a lung and felt like crap all the time. Like when you experience perfection, whether it be perfection in your own spiritual life and like the resurrected body, or whether like that communion with Christ, like you would not want to go away from that. I think once you experience God, kind of like I talked about a while ago, like when you experience God, you want more of that. You want to grow closer to him, just as like as you in an ideal relationship, you fall in love with someone, you fall more and more in love with them every day. I tell my wife pretty much every day that I love her more today than I did yesterday and the day before. I think that's how it is with God. So like, yeah, maybe you can leave if you want to. Nobody's gonna want to.
I will just, because I know it seems like Than, you want to say something. I will just note really quickly, this kind of idea that the only way that this functions, this seems to sort of presume a kind of libertarian free will, where somebody is only free if they are able to meaningfully have chosen otherwise. And as someone who doesn't hold a libertarian free will and largely think that that's an incoherent account of freedom, I think you could still plausibly be free to do what you will inside of heaven. It's just the case that everyone has willed to be in service of God, and therefore freedom persists in that sense. Now, not everyone has to agree to that, but that is a way that a Christian could understand this and evade the objection that this is an imposition on a sort of libertarian freedom, if you will.
Well, so before I get into what I'm going to say here, that's kind of like the beauty about this. Like that's the problem, I think, when it comes to just kind of making some of these critiques against the Christian worldview by attacking this belief and that, or that belief or this belief. But then you have all these theoretical assumptions built within your critique. And even if we grant that that critique actually works, it only works on those theoretical assumptions. But the thing about Christianity is there's so much explanatory flexibility, right? We're not stuck with having to say there's free will in heaven. Otherwise, that sucks. Like if there's no free will in heaven, then heaven doesn't exist. Like this video that I have here, why didn't God make us all in heaven? I'm actually granting that in heaven, we're not going to have any kind of morally significant freedom. And I'm saying, even if that's the case, it could be the case that heaven, we might not have morally significant freedom, but heaven is still good in the sense that creatures that had morally significant freedom chose to be in a place that they don't have it anymore in virtue of their love of God or something like that. So people that are like want to know a little bit more about that, I'd recommend watching that video, because
that would be a more libertarian compatible.
Yeah, a libertarian approach. Yeah, and again, I'm totally fine with. But again, like that's the cool thing too, right? Like you and I are friends. We're all friends here, and we all have disagreements on these tiny little things that Scripture just doesn't like. The Christian worldview doesn't necessitate us to adopt any of these particular views, right? And so that's why I think that people are going to have a really hard time pointing to something like this and being like, here's a logical inconsistency, right? Because you have to make so many theoretical assumptions before you get to that point. I will say this. Actually, no, never mind. I'm going to hold it because
Wait,
I don't know.
I got a thing.
Next. Yeah, go.
Pardon me while I clear my throat. So there's a couple of things that I was thinking when he was talking about this. The first was the narcissism, and then the second was the slavery. And so, I mean, there's a lot to say about the slavery aspect, but first about the narcissism. I mean, you already brought up the paper and stuff, but I also wrote down some of my own thoughts on this, which is thinking about, okay, like, what is God, right? He is, or like, what is the attribute that would be of interest to us? And thinking about God, it would be his moral perfection or his perfect goodness. So thinking about God's perfect goodness, he, meets up with all the attributes of that which is perfectly good. And then, of course, giving just the nature of goodness itself, the self-giving nature of goodness, that it just wants there to be more good, right? And so, as I think that we are morally developing throughout our life and stuff like that, and that will be eclipsed by that moral development in heaven, that will be the great point of our moral development, or the great conclusion, I guess, that we ourselves will also be perfectly good, or on our way to being perfectly good in that respect. And so what God wants is for there to be more good. And how do we worship God? By doing good things. And we ourselves will be morally good and morally perfect. And so we will want to do good things. So it's all a self-feeding cycle where we're just doing what we want to do. But that coincides with worshiping God, because he is the pinnacle, or the crux of all that which is good. And so at that point, it's like, okay, well, I mean, it couldn't be slavery, because we're doing what God wants us to do of our own free will, because it took our free will to develop those characteristics. And then at that point, God could ask us to do those things, if you think that he asks us to do those things, and we would happily oblige him, because that is in our nature and in our character to want to do those things.
That's the cooperation bit I was talking about earlier.
Yeah. Exactly. And also too, I mean, the motive for God and the motive for us is seeking the good, seeking the best. And so at that point, it's not narcissism. It's literally definitionally seeking that which is best for all, that which is the greatest, that's motivating, not anything about uplifting himself per se, but all to do with, seeking that which is objectively the greatest. And so there's a little more I could say on that, but I'll leave that for now. Yeah. And then the slavery thing, just one brief thing I would say is that let's assume, and I don't take it that this is what heaven is like, but again, let's assume this sort of naive picture of being overwhelmed by euphoric, and I don't mean naive in a pejorative sense, I just mean naive in the sort of more simplistic sense, just to be clear. But this naive picture of us being like overwhelmed with euphoric feelings in the experience of God. Well, let's just say that, that is what Christians are seeking, is to be in the presence of God. And through our own free will, we make choices such that that is what we want in our ultimate, source of life. And that is the thing that we desire, is to be in the presence of God. Then it's not slavery, because we've made our own choice throughout, throughout our lives to be overwhelmed by, that good in that way. So if that makes any sense. But
yeah. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted just to answer Cameron Allier's, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your last name, question. How do you guys think this interacts with demons, like leaving heaven and everything? One, I just don't think that the heaven that is referred to when it's talking about this in scripture is identical to the heaven that that's in view when we're talking about this. And what I mean by that is, like, when we're talking about heaven, we're talking about the eschatological end state, the renewing of the cosmos, where we are on the new heaven, new earth type of thing, walking in harmony with God and doing what James talked about in the beginning of this. So, like, the demons leaving heaven isn't identical to us leaving this post-eschatological state. The other thing I just want to say is, and this is up for debate amongst Christians, but I think Christian and I would agree here, and I don't know about you, James or Kyle, but Christian and I hold to like a type of theosis, and it's going to be like, well, okay, so you're all nodding your head. So I don't think the demons were in this. I don't think these rebelling Elohim are in a state of theosis in the same way that we are going to be in theosis with God, because we are like the dwelling place of God as Christians and as saints, and that the end state there is going to be like a post eschatological sanctification. Where
this is
God
something
dwells.
that Saint Gregory of Nyssa writes about very, 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 very precociously, where he says that the end state of human beings as a race, as a collective, is this kind of theosis of which participates in each other in cooperation in God's grace and glory. So I could speak about that more, but we should probably.
Yeah. No. I was just trying to answer a question. That's all.
No, I got you.
I was going to tag on my thoughts to the thing Cameron
Yes, please
said.
do.
So, one, I would point out that the rebelling Elohim who are cast out of heaven, right? It's not like they're just like, well, we'll take our ball. Like the description, whether it be in Revelations or in like Ezekiel 28, Isaiah 14, whatever, it's like they're cast from heaven. So like I would be reluctant to say this is voluntary. Second, I would mention that a lot of the rebellious aspects that these Elohims do are instances where they're not in heaven, they're amongst the earth. So I'm thinking here of either the Elohim who are governing the nations, like okay, they're here down on the earth. The Watchers, if you follow that story, they were here on the earth, things like that. But then also what Than and Christian already touched on, which is like I personally think that the Elohim are themselves being taught things, like to use the word soul building. I don't want to import everything of that language, but I think that part of what goes on in the history of the cosmos is not just God teaching us things and getting us to come to love him. I think God's doing that same thing with the Elohim. And so the epistemic place that we are at in heaven, the eschatological heaven that Than was talking about, that's different than the epistemic place that the demons are at when they choose to rebel. So I think there's some serious disanalogies there, but that's a really good question. That's a good point that you brought up.
Well,
Okay, good.
I was just gonna finish that off by just saying, like, I think that's very valuable, because it's a fairly valuable question, because I think that is one of those questions that, Cameron, I know you personally, so like I know the typical Christian that in the pew might not actually know about those disanalogies that we just brought up, though. Right, the typical Christian in the pew, or like the popular view of heaven in general, might not posit or understand the those epistemic differences between the demons and us in the post-eschatological world. So thank you for asking that, because it's really important.
Yep.
Go ahead, Dr. Plantico.
I'm a doctor now. I have so many expectations on me. My parents.
It's not actually a doctor. I just did that to troll him.
Yeah. So I just want to say, like, well, I know I take a controversial stand in being an anti-realist about demons and Satan, but even if you don't think that, so I don't think that's an issue on my view, because I don't think that those things exist. I think that they have a relevant point in the particular literatures that they're in, but not necessarily a relevant place in the metaphysics of the Christian. But I would say, if you do think that they have that important place, then in line with what everyone else is saying, that God created us to be sort of on a pathway or on a line towards theosis, right? And demons and angels were not created on that particular train, on that particular line. And so I think it is that fact that we are on that particular model, heading towards being like God in such a way that we're indistinguishable, and that sort of idea. Whereas angels and demons, if they were moral creatures, would not be on that sort of pathway. that I think that is a relevant difference as well. But I digress.
Cool. All right. We should let him talk some more on problem 2 because we stopped like a few seconds in.
Can I choose oblivion at some point? Maybe after 2 billion years, I'm just really done with this concept. Can I leave? No, I can't leave. Well, Brandon, it's not so much that you can't leave, it's that God wouldn't have you have the desire to leave. So God's controlling me. God's controlling my mind. God's controlling my will and my desires. He's forcing it. He's compelling it by his very presence. That's slavery. I don't care what positive spin you want to put on it because you've called God a good thing. I'll even for all of
the answer to all those things, the answer to the line of things you just said is no. Now we can continue.
Yeah, pretty much. It's like
we covered all those answers before.
Yeah.
So.
Right.
And the idea that this God is actually somehow good, just, and moral, which is already so problematic, right? But I'm trying.
So, I mean, like, right there, I think it's just something I want to quibble about. It's one of my favorite new words is quibbles. Everybody say quibbles in the chat.
Oh, no, you have another favorite word. What have we done?
Because, like, there's kind of an inconsistency with this critique now, right? It's like, well, let me just grant you all this stuff. But by the way, like, God's not actually good, kind of a thing. There's tons of issues with that.
Internal and external, like I said earlier, are getting mixed at the speed of light here, where there's being external critiques mapped onto internal critiques, and they're just being given side by side as if they can be true at the same time.
Right. So I'm fine if you want to actually, like, I'm also having a hard time understanding if he's doing like an evil God challenge type thing, or if he's just saying like, if God exists, he's just not all good type thing. Like, I'd like to know exactly why he might think that there's tons of problems with the idea that there's an all good God. I'm assuming the problem of evil is one of them, maybe just pointing to Old Testament hard passages about slavery, war, all this other stuff, which is stuff that I think all of us have talked about, and there's tons of different answers and there's tons of different views. But I'd like to know a little bit more, because just gesturing towards this problem in the middle of a critique, it just, in the most charitable way possible that I can say this, it just feels like gish galloping.
He's trying to fill his atheist bingo card.
What's going on. Or James can just do this way. I'm trying to be nice, so like,
nah, it's petty,
well, at least with
petty,
the gish gallop, they're completed arguments with a purpose, I suppose. But in this case, it's more of an elongated rant.
Yeah. Okay. So I just wanted to touch on that, because I can't tell if it's an internal or external critique, what's happening, if he's ungranting the things he's granting, but I digress.
Trying to really just think like, okay, you guys are all right. This God is real. Hell doesn't exist. There's oblivion and annihilation and universalism and all of these things. How is heaven going?
Hey, universalism.
I have no say in the matter. I have no say that that's the only alternative, right? Like with universalism, or that it's sure, maybe it is better than hell. I'll give you that. But the lesser of two evils doesn't make it beneficial or good. And God forcing it to be good, right? Like if I can't even choose to think how I want to feel about it, to have my own experience, if every single person who's ever lived, think about how different we all are. If we're all going to have exactly perfect, repeatable, and expected outcomes in heaven, to experience everything in the exact same way, so
I there's a few things I'm a little unclear here on, and maybe you guys can help me interpret this, because one, I don't think any of us believe that we're going to be perfect in heaven in the same sense that God is perfect. I actually still think that we're going to be growing in heaven in the alethic, moral, and aesthetic realms. I don't know.
I mean, I tend to think of it this way. I mean, goodness is in heaven like it is on earth, diversely expressed and multiplicatively attested to, right? So I think it's wrong to say that when you enter heaven, the part of you that has all these unique expressions of good, unique interests, etc., that part of you is removed for a sort of cookie cutter kind of individual, where you will, in the same sense as everyone else, hold to the same kind of sets of memories or sets of, et cetera, right? Because goodness is diversely expressed, and because individual people will have various different kinds of memories and associations with others, and that love will be diversely expressed cooperatively between others of which we know and have known and come to know in heaven, it doesn't seem to follow to me that everyone would have an identical experience. I don't think your individuality is destroyed when you enter heaven. I think your individuality is what is entering, and it's a valuable part of heaven, and it needs to be there for heaven to be able to diversely express all goods.
And what I think one of the things I'm gonna argue is, and Kyle, you haven't heard me talk about this before, but like, I've been experimenting a lot with this powers and liabilities way of cashing out more like freedom, and
It is an
and
excellent way.
and its relationship to theosis itself. And so, well, there's a few things I want to say here, but like I'll stick. Let me keep on track here. My ADHD brain is going in like 5 different directions at the same time. This is the problem with not prepping for a stream. So with all that being said, like it seems to me like you just said, Christian, like this heaven, I don't see a reason for it to necessarily be deterministic. In the same sense that he's like trying to say this. It might be the case that it might be the case that I miss out on moral freedom. And if by moral freedom you just mean I just won't have the ability to choose to murder my wife over love her, right? But that doesn't mean that I still can't grow in moral character and have options to choose from between in like the reference of moral goodness, right? Like, so for instance, I could choose to get my wife flowers, or I could choose my wife to get my wife Chick-fil-A. She loves both of those, right? And they're both good options, but I'm just like, I have freedom to choose within those good outcomes. And so it's not the case that like it's just going to be testable, repeatable, like deterministic. Like there's a lot of assumptions being built into this that I don't think are actually going to be the case.
Yeah, and I want to
Get what I'm
tag
trying to say?
something. Yeah, I want to tag on to that. The idea that all of our experiences of heaven are going to be exactly identical is fundamentally antagonistic to the picture of the church that we're giving in Scripture. Because the picture that we're given in Scripture is everyone's different and everybody has a function. And the eye should not say, oh, because I'm not an ear, I have no place in the body of God. Like, we're not all the same and have the same functions and have the same experiences. So what he's attacking, the idea of, well, everyone just experiences the exact same thing, like over and over again, like, yeah, that would maybe be problematic, but I sure am glad that that's not what Christianity has traditionally affirmed. So it feels like I'm in the clear.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of put that into Christian, can I talk about? I won't say the details. Can I just talk about how you called me this morning?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Okay, so like one of the examples is that I think that highlights that is like, we're all like philosophically minded. We love data, yada yada yada, right? Like we're those kinds of people. But at the same time, like one of the things that I'm actually like discovering about myself is I have a pastoral side, and which is really weird because I told Christian this morning I feel like I'm a dick that's just trying his best not to be a dick.
I didn't think you were going to repeat that, but yeah, that's
but the point I'm trying to make here is like, I don't know if any of you would say that, but like one of like the nice things about that is just like within our group of friends, there's like just a seldom few people that are in our group that are actually have that pastoral side to them that can actually come alongside people and like give practical faith advice, not just like here's the data, boom, kind of a thing. And that's just like an example of that what you just said, James, put into action just even here pre-eschaton. So yeah, I think that's a really good point. The next thing I just want to say is like, again, he said something along the lines of like, well, heaven isn't good because God makes it good. He's kind of just making this, okay, well, God is making it the case that it's good. He's choosing your desires, all this other stuff. So let's just grant that just for now, even though all of us would agree, like, that's not what's happening here. This is like a type of theosis type thing happening. That being said, if we grant that, it still doesn't get you to this place where it's like heaven isn't good because you don't have moral freedom. Because again, we might just argue that heaven is good because agents that had the freedom to choose heaven and choose God choosing their desires made that decision to enter into a relationship with him in that way. And this, like, again, a thought experiment for this is just my wife likes spending time with me. This is one I always give. My wife loves spending time with me. And there's two like contrasting scenarios. Scenario A, I take time off of work and I just go to the zoo with her and we have a date. And she loves it. That sounds good, right? Scenario 2, she puts a potion in my steak that causally determines me to take her to the zoo so we can go hang out with each other. And she loves it. One of those scenarios is more valuable than the other, right? Well, the fact that I had the moral freedom to choose that is like what points to that direction of like, okay, the moral choice is the good thing. Even though the everything was the exact same, the more valuable thing was I chose this, and ultimately this is what would happen. And in the same sense, God gives us the opportunity to choose heaven. Whatever the end state is, we still chose, kind of a thing. So
Yeah, and I don't even know if this is something that maybe I'm off track here, but like, let's suppose God does just causally determine what I want in heaven. And it's because God causally determines what I want in heaven that I'm having a great time. I'm still having a great time. So I don't understand how this is supposed to be an objection to the idea of paradise. You know what I'm saying here? Like this is a weird objection to me. I mean, because like you might be like, oh, well, if God determines it, like it's not valuable for these other means. But if you're objecting to like the very incoherence of the idea of paradise, like the idea that you can't be happy forever, right? Like which just seems to be the kind of the idea that he's getting at here. It's weird to be like, oh, well, you know, all of this is because you know, God made you do it and enslaved and all that. Like even if I granted all that nonsense, which I don't, because we've been talking about that. I'm not sure how that actually like builds on his idea of critiquing paradise, because even if God does all that, even if it's slavery, if
yeah.
I'm having a great time, it still seems like paradise is a thing and it's happening, and like that seems pretty great.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Like
that's something I was thinking about. I'm glad you said that, because like one of the things I'm thinking about too is, look, if we do grant that, his first problem goes away, because it could just be the case that God determines us to not get bored in heaven. Right? Like that seems like something a good God would do if he's going to causally determine everything and heaven's causally determined. Well, any critiques that you might have on a subjective level, like you might get bored, yada, yada, yada. Well, those are going to go away because God's just going to causally determine you to have a blast the whole time. Worship, and even if I grant that heaven is literally just a 24/7 worship service, singing tacky Christian songs, you're still going to have a blast because God causally determined you to have a blast doing it, right? So, yeah, I just don't know.
That would be a miracle, by the way, for me to enjoy those tacky Christian songs in heaven. So I would be very thankful for that.
Yeah, I'd be wanting to do some nice like Anglican liturgy and stuff. That would be more of my style.
I'm a screamo guy, so.
Dude, when you played the heavy metal music, like to start the stream, I thought about like we're playing this heavy metal music to talk about a stream about heaven. And I thought, what if that's your intro song into heaven? Like Than dies, he's walking into the kingdom of God.
It's like my MMA walk-up song.
Yeah, yeah. It's the Bayesian brawler.
That'd be great. All right, we're already at 48 minutes, so let's try to. Is there anything you guys
get past problem 2? Yeah,
I think problem 2. Like he goes back into problem 1 while talking about problem 2 at some point. So yeah.
Okay.
I think too, like the more that there's so many things that he sort of regurgitates throughout that I think we'll be able to get through the second half quicker too.
Okay.
So yeah.
Let's move on. This leads us to point 3, which is the free will issue. This is probably honestly one of the top 2 issues with heaven. Okay, so once again, we can't cry, we can't suffer, we can't feel pain, we can't die, etc. All of these things, again, straight from Revelation. So are we good in heaven? Yeah, we're the epitome of good. We're as moral gets. Okay, so I can't suffer and I am good. I'm good all the time. Everything I do and say is good because it has to be, because otherwise it might bring suffering to me or to other people. It could bring sadness. It could bring sin. There's no sin in heaven. If there's no sin in heaven, then there's 100% only good moral things according to God. That right there, 100% means there's no free will in heaven, because that is the entire defense for why we must have free will on earth. Now,
not quite.
Maybe you haven't heard it.
Not quite. So not quite. That would be true if we took an exclusively libertarian understanding of the will. And we said that the only way that the will is free is if it has the possibility to have chosen otherwise or to have engaged in the evil, right? This is not the only option available to the Christian. The Christian may be a compatibilist and say that freedom is only being able to do what you will, right? That is an expression of freedom. So if the point that he's making is as simple as libertarian free will cannot exist in heaven, you know, maybe you three will have a response to that will explicate how it has happened. I'm okay with saying it can't, and I don't think that's what freedom is, right? So I think that's the response I would have to the objection is, I don't think that's what freedom is. I'm a compatibilist. And second of all, even if that was the case, it doesn't seem problematic to say that libertarian freedom doesn't exist in heaven. I don't know how that means that heaven is not the place that Christians claim it to be.
Yeah, so that's a good point to mention. And then I would say, like, because I come at things from a more libertarian background. So like I think what you just said, like great, like that's definitely an avenue a Christian can take. But I can also note several things, which is like, okay, so like because as you mentioned, he's kind of taking libertarian free will to mean like the possibility to do otherwise. But the possibility to do otherwise as a requirement for libertarian agency is extremely controversial in philosophy in this area. Frankfurt cases have been presented against this, and so
Correct.
a very like vague way that some people are articulating libertarian free will now is not the ability to do otherwise, whether or not the choice in question, are you the source of that choice, or was it something external that kind of determined you to do it? And so if in heaven, if I'm only choosing good things for eternity and everybody else is, as long as the source of those choices is myself, like my now more mature moral goodness and all that, that would my not choosing those other things, or my inability to choose those other things, that would not be a violation of free will, because it's still the case that the source of those choices is coming from myself, not from something external to me. And then so that's an issue. But then let's just say, okay, possibility to do otherwise, like let's just say, yeah, that's a real requirement of libertarian free will. Like I still don't have an issue, because I can be like, okay, it's metaphysically or logically possible for you to do those sins in heaven, but you just won't do those sins for the same reason that like I have the ability to stick my hand in a running blender, but I'm not going to do that. And as long as, you know, like my cognitive, you know, faculties are functioning correctly, and, you know, it's not like someone's putting a gun to my head, like as long as the circumstances are normal, like because of my maturity and my, you know, mental awareness of the consequences of that, like I'm not going to do that. I'm not even tempted to do that.
There wouldn't be any external pressures of which condition you to act rationally.
Exactly.
And therefore the will could still be free in some libertarian sense. That's a good response. I think that's clever.
Yeah. All right, let's pull this back up. Unless anybody has also got something to say.
No, let's just continue.
I'm still trying to figure out what the crux of problem 3 is.
Well, maybe you've excused it. And I'm going to really ask you to consider this point if you claim to be a believer. Why does God let bad things happen? Well, you don't understand. It's not really God doing it or letting it happen here on earth, Brandon. He had to allow free will. We have to understand pain to understand pleasure. We have to be able to reject him so that he doesn't force us.
Actually, I'm going to pause it now. Or have you pause it.
Is problem 3 just the problem of evil?
It looks
well, kind of. So I won't venture to articulate it. We'll watch that part in a second anyway. But I just want to say, like, he seems to think, okay, here's where this might be very disturbing or problematic to someone if the problem was brought up and there were no sort of solid solution to it. Hypothetically, my reason for thinking that God allows evil is exclusively because God allows free will, and then all the things that he listed. And if that's my reason, and then I realize that there can't be free will in heaven, which I obviously dispute anyway, but let's just say I didn't, then, it seems as if my theodicy might be in jeopardy. Like,
so this is like Hoppy's problem of heaven.
Yeah. I think that anyone who's done good research, and I think I really mean anyone who has done, even a Christian atheist who's done good research, should recognize that the best theodicies on the table aren't in and of themselves free will theodicies. Mm-hmm. Now, I think what's important is that a lot of useful theodicies do incorporate libertarian notions as sort of a tool or a property in the theodicies, right? But that doesn't mean that if you don't carry over the property throughout the life of the theodicy, that the theodicy will be useless to you. And that would be what would be required, is something to the effect of, in order for God to allow evil, he must, through the life of a person, continuously maintain, and I think this is metaphysically impossible anyway, but just hypothetically, maintain that for any ethical choice you make, in every instance, or in many or most instances, you have the principle of alternative possibilities applies. But I think that all that's needed is to say, and I don't even think this is needed, but I think that it's there's some solid theodicies that work this way, is to say that that I that in the beginning of several theodicies, or throughout the earthly part of several theodicies, starting out with a libertarian sense of freedom is very important. But the way that those theodicies work their best is actually if we work ourselves out of the and I hate to use this language as someone who likes philosophy of free will, but I'll say most free, or most power over our choices will be delimited later on. That those are the better theodicies, where we start with the open choices, and that our open choices are formative to close in our choices later on. And I think that this is also an intuitively plausible point of view as well. The sort of sourcehood libertarians, where they have maybe not every choice requires us to have that alternative possibility, but certain choices do and did and resulted in important aspects of moral forming, and that is where it comes in. But that doesn't mean that you need alternative possibilities throughout the course of your life. And again, also, even if you don't have, even if at some point a million years from now I don't have alternative possibilities in any of my choices, hypothetically, as long as I got there with them, I'm still a sourcehood libertarian. I'm still a libertarian. I can still use the theodicies and also still not worry about sin in heaven in the ways that he's expressing.
Yeah.
It seems to me that theodicies are conditional responses, right? So if it's the case that a conditional response fails to obtain in some set of cases, that doesn't seem to be problematic for the truth of the conditional response in case X.
Right. So there's something that I see. There's also this mistake that I just think people make a lot, and I think that goes into what you said in the beginning of this, Kyle, where you said, people that are well read in the philosophy in the philosophical literature with the problem of evil will recognize that the free will theodicy is not really like what people are really putting out most of the time. Most of the time, when you hear free will, it's used as a defense to logical formulations of the problem of evil, not used as a theodicy. So I would implore whoever's listening that thinks that what he's saying is salient here, look at actually what the philosophers are saying when it comes to theodicy, because typically free will is just a defense to render something like J.L. Mackey's logical problem of evil invalid. That's all. And then Pine Creek just asked a question here that I think is worth responding to here. Allow evil. I don't think there's a big distinction between allowing and causing for an omniscient being. So my initial response to that is just going to be this. I think that presumes what I would call, or what, what's his name? Oh, shoot. I almost said Alvin Plantinga. I forget the philosopher's name. Van Inwagen. Van Inwagen calls this a pick and choose model of creation, where God just looks at his grocery list of possible worlds and sees this possible world and just chooses it and instantiates it. That presumes like a pick and choose model and over like a disjunctive model of creation, where God looks at subsets of best possible worlds, and then he just creates initial world segments, and then the possible worlds within those subset of possible worlds obtain in virtue of the free choices of creatures. That would not be God directly causing any of the free choices. That would be those possible worlds within that subset of possible worlds obtaining in virtue of the free choices of creatures, not which world God creates. And so on that model, God isn't causing anything. He's allowing those things to happen within that subset of possible worlds. And so
that's quite right on that part. The idea that there's a distinction between causing every particular successive event, or being the initial cause, and then everything else being properly indeterminate as respective to will. That's the answer to Doug's question. Crystallized.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to point out, like, right now, Fan is allowing me to speak and have voice on his channel. Like, he could cut this off at any second. He could just be like, Garb is gone. Okay, so Fan is allowing me to do this. Did Fan cause me to get on screen? Like, or was it my choice? Or, I was thinking before that, I was like, okay, let's say my wife says, like, oh, I'm gonna go like make a sandwich. I'm like, okay, like, my wife's short, I'm tall, I'm strong. If she wants to make a sandwich, I could stop her. Like, I have the upper body, she doesn't. Like, I can make it happen. Like, I could be like, no sandwich for you. But let's say I don't do that, all right? And I allow my wife to make a sandwich. did I
How
cause
good of
her to
you.
make the sandwich? Did I cause the sandwich? Like, that's asinine. Like, I don't understand. Like, this, like, trying to blur and be like, oh, allow and cause are the same thing, just seems like as soon as you put that in our normal use of the words allow and cause, like, I think how silly that argument is.
Yeah,
it
and
becomes apparent.
it reminds me a little bit of certain discussions that I've had with certain friends of mine before, where they will levy the use of certain words, and I don't mean this in a pejorative sense or in the sense that they're like trying to be dishonest or anything, but I just mean that they'll use certain words in certain ways, like that are designed to sort of make you feel uncomfortable with the usage of the word, but when you actually properly apply it to a situation and then you put your intuitions to it, it sort of makes more sense. And so what I would agree with Doug about is, let's say we're looking at a picture of the world where God selects a deterministic state, or actually here's a better one. Here's a better one. God selects between God indeterministically selects between three deterministic scenarios, three deterministic worlds, which will, when any one of them is instituted, there's a necessary pathway that follows. And then God indeterministically picks between one of the three of them. And then at that point, you can say that God allowed the instantiation of the events in those worlds, but he didn't cause them. But it's still and so that's where you can see a distinction. So where I'd say there's no distinction between God causing sin directly and allowing sin is that, like, if you're a causal determinist, so if you think God just chose and made a world, I don't think there's any distinction there. I think if you have the indeterministic scenario I just described, then that seems to have a distinction between causing and allowing. But then I would tend to agree with Doug to think that that situation seems a little less like there's less of a distinction. But then if you genuinely place creatures in a world with free will, where they have the causal powers to do certain things, but it's not necessitated that they do certain things or make certain actions in the right way, then it really does seem like there's a distinction because when God instituted the world, it was not metaphysically necessary that they do any of those things. Whether or not they in fact did, it is truly an instance of allowance over causing. And so, even though God is sort of part of the causal upstream, which resulted in those choices, he still didn't directly cause them to exist or want them to exist or anything like that. God can have a preference. I can coherently have a preference between two choices and not get the choice that I most want in a particular instance. But I digress.
Right.
LPE and EPE seems too big to keep discussing any further instead of just sort of getting on to.
There's a lot of comments happening on it, and we're already an hour in, so
you're good.
We should just keep going. So is this pretty much problem of evil, problem 3, problem of evil, problem of heaven?
We can maybe play it a little bit more just to make sure, but that seems
okay. And that's the excuse for all of the atrocities on this earth. And if you really are too historically ignorant or too in your bubble to understand the realities of the horror of this world and of the history of this world, to think that that is somehow a justifiable excuse, I feel sorry for you.
It seems like problem of evil. I say let's jump forward.
That's not what this is about. This is about heaven. So there is
I got to say, though, that was not a bad Sam Harris impression.
And I'm worried I might end up redundant here, but I'm going to try to hit on the idea of perfection and of stagnation. So despite the point that we just went through, I really actually understand to a degree the concept that one cannot appreciate the good things in life without some understanding of the bad things in life. The problem is there's so much bad and suffering in this world that the good does not outweigh it. And I don't think it's as easy as a one-to-one compensation or even a heaven to earth compensation, right? Should 4 children have to starve to death in the next few minutes for me to appreciate the next meal that I'm going to get? Is that the idea? Is that the trade-off that has to happen? How many young women need to be raped for other women to appreciate being in a good relationship, right? These are just...
Okay, no, this seems like
from heaven to problem of evil.
This is now evidential.
Yeah, and I don't think that I would endorse any of the theodicies that he's putting forward.
I don't know.
I don't know that I would endorse them point blank, let alone as a full-throated solution. So
right.
I'm not interested in disagreeing with him here.
Yeah. Does anybody
Yeah,
I would agree. That's a bad theodicy.
I don't think the reason why, people experience, particular evil X is because of particular good Y over here, and we can draw a linear line between the two and say this is justificatory. That's not a response I would use.
Yeah, I don't like the idea that like, oh well, you can't experience anything good unless you also experience evil. Like that's I've never seen any scholar or I don't know if I've even heard many laymen be like present that. Like that is that's pretty out there.
Yeah.
So not too
All right, let's just see what else he says on this. But if it's we'll just skip to problem 5 if there's not much.
Just inexcusable and immoral ideas to me that we had to have this level of suffering. God did control this. God did set up the arrangement. He is at some point holding the puppet strings, and he has made certain barriers within when he will intervene, when he won't, what the initial setup is, how capable we are as individuals of doing things to other individuals, etc. Like there are limits that he has put on our earthly existence. And within those limits, he is still allowed for this amount of suffering versus this amount of pleasure. It does not add up. It is horrible all on its own without adding in the heaven factor. But there are some things. Let's go back to my example of taking up a hobby. What makes a hobby enjoyable? Well, we actually have a lot of research on this from a neuroscience standpoint, where we understand that.
Wait, is he changing points here? Wait.
Yeah, that seems like the same point.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, just problem of evil stuff. I'll just say this. Good theodicy, defeat condition, cosmic warfare thesis, right? And I already said defeat condition. I think all those three put together just render kind of this point moot. I also just think that given theism that you might actually expect suffering in some way. Again, you should, if you haven't read like Trent Doherty's book on the problem of animal pain, it's a must read. That helps you kind of understand why the probability of suffering that you see in this world is almost identical to the probability of theism. Then I highly suggest reading that book because it'll help you understand that. I just wanted to say
and I would just say, as far as like, don't want to spend too long on the problem of evil, because it does seem like he's actually getting back to his original topic of his video, which is heaven. Just the idea of like, oh, okay, why did God put these limits on himself? Like, as me and Than have talked about before, like these self-imposed limits make a lot of sense if you're coming at this from a cosmic warfare perspective.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to throw out a book there. Like, I recommend John Peckham's Theodicy of Love to kind of incorporate cosmic warfare into a theodicy and why God might limit himself and things along those lines. Yep.
Cool.
And that really it's the process of achieving a goal that is so desirable, that is so enjoyable. It's not reaching that, right? I'm someone who for a number of years was very heavy into endurance sports, and it is always fun to cross the finish line on your first ultra marathon. That was a big goal I had, and I've done a lot of them now, and I've done longer distances, and each time it's exciting, and there's a huge sense of accomplishment, but it's immediately over. And what I realized I was enjoying the whole time was the achievement of getting better, right? Setting a new PR in training, upping my weekly mileage, learning how to deal with that injury better, going for that run when it was really cold and snowy or really rainy or 105 degrees and humid, seeing myself grow in self-discipline, seeing myself push through and become more mentally tough and stable. These were the true treasures, but they were only treasures because there were days when I quit. I didn't go on the run in the rain because I couldn't run as fast, because I couldn't make it all the way up that hill without stopping. Those are the pains that make the pleasures worth it. So again, I understand that to a certain extent. I don't understand it to the extent that we're excusing all the horrors of this world. But in heaven, to get back to my point here, there can't be any of that. So yes, on one hand, inexcusable with the free will concept and
So, okay, what he just described there's at least two problems with that. First, as I've articulated earlier, I think that we will have projects and we will be doing things on the new earth. I think that like that's scriptural. So the idea of like not having hobbies or whatever, I think is nonsensical. And so at this point, I want to make kind of a really rough analogy. Like I love video games. I love games in general. Just like I love games in general. I like how it tickles my brain and how I have to figure out problems. That's enjoyable to me, right? So I imagine a world in which, so if I play a game a lot, I eventually get bored of it because I've already figured the game out, right? Like I know how to jump through these hoops. I know all the secrets and so on. But imagine like a really great open world game, and instead of I think about something like Starfield, which just came out and is like selling like hotcakes, right? Because people love the idea of exploration in space, things like that. Imagine that, but there's always a ton of new content, and other players can contribute really phenomenal content, and and it's like that for example. Like you're never going to run out of content. Like that's the idea.
Vehicles?
Is there? They are land vehicles, yes, in heaven. Yeah. So just
very good.
Yeah. So, but here's another issue with this line of thought, right? Is he's confusing an instrument of good with good itself.
Yeah.
So like one could easily, even if they don't buy into the stuff I'm talking about, like us doing things in the new earth and stuff like that, I can be like, okay, listen, but what you had access to through your hobbies, those were vessels or instruments through which you were able to experience the good. But when you're in heaven and with God, you don't need the instruments anymore. Like you don't need that medium. Like you were directly present with the good, like the thing that you were, trying to get a hit of through your hobbies. And so like either one of those reasons is the things I just mentioned about, I think is enough to just be like, yeah, this is just a non-starter as an argument. But as much as I think that we will be doing things in heaven, I think just his failure to recognize the difference between something be a vessel of good, like that seems to me to be the real big problem here. Is like, yeah, you like those things made you happy, but now you're going to be in direct contact with happiness itself, like the source of happiness.
Yeah, and I don't think that, like, I mean, again, I think it's important to like contextualize on the ideas that Revelation is trying to get across, but I think the idea would be that like all of the negative things that are really bad, that are earnestly bad about life, are to be rid of, right? But I don't know that. I mean, I think there's sort of two or three, probably three, great existential experiences or goods that are sort of limitless. I think that doing the good for the sake of the good is one of those. I think creativity is one of those, and I think exploration is one of those. And I don't think that any of those three things can be exhausted. I don't think that you can grow tired of doing the good for the sake of the good. I don't think that you can tire per se of exploring or being creative. I think that those have sort of limitless possibilities to get into. And so I don't think that anyone thinks of all challenges as evils or as pains, right?
Right.
So the challenge of me working out a puzzle, I don't think that anyone would say that the challenge of that is painful in a way that is bad or anything like that, that would need to be expunged or defeated in heaven. I think that's part of the enjoyment, is the fact that I can't immediately access what's going on with the puzzle, as I go to it. And I think that I'm all into music. So one thing that I'm always thinking about is what's a band that's doing something that is intriguing that I've never thought about before. I've never, an atmosphere that I've never thought that could be made with instruments. And it's challenging and unique and different to come up with things like that. But I don't think that challenge is equatable to the sort of evil that would be eliminated in heaven. And so at the end of the day, I think that that there are these things that would present so many layers of fun and enjoyment for us in heaven that really are inexhaustible in that particular way. But I digress.
Yeah, no, I think that like one of the things I like kind of joke about this, but I also don't at the same time. Like I always make jokes with my friends that like anime, that like we'll both be training like Goku and Vegeta in heaven, and we'll be able to spar and all that other stuff. But like it's gonna be like hard, but it's gonna be also really fun. And I actually think we'll be able to do and enjoy those types of things and get better and go towards a goal, right? Like heaven's not going to be this place where we're just going to be in like our chiseled bodybuilder physiques right away. I think we'll be able to.
Dang it, that's what I was hoping for, man.
I'm like, it'd be cool if I could just eat cheesecake all day and still be like ripped, but I think heaven is still going to have those types of values where I can work for that, if that makes sense.
And I want to add one last thing on here, which is, so this comes back to the monotony point, because this kind of like, his monotony thing kind of seems to flow throughout his video, is like, you can still enjoy something even if you've done it before. I mean, I know in my own personal life, I will have hobbies that I do and I burn myself out on them. I don't like this anymore. And then I come back years later and I'm like, oh, I like this again. It's like, I've had a break. Like, this is enjoyable. Or like a lot of us, like maybe like you grew up. Yeah, or I was thinking like, like there are games I played when I was like 8, and maybe now I would go back and I would enjoy playing those because it's been so long and I have nostalgic feelings and things like that. I don't see why in heaven or on the new earth, like if I do something at year 10,000, and then maybe I don't do it for another million years, I don't know why I couldn't be like, oh, I'm gonna go back and do that thing I did at 10,000. Like that sounds fun again. Like I don't see why like it has to be increasing novelty forever. Like I don't see why I can't even if we say, okay, like there's a finite amount of things you can do, if that range is really broad, it seems like I could just keep on jumping from thing to thing, and even if I backtrace some, like as long as I'm still enjoying it, like that's paradise.
And I think too, like at least the first thing I always think of is art. I'm like, art is one of those things that you can always come back to. If it's truly good art, you can always come back to it and enjoy it. And I do that with music all the time, where there are bands that I admire very much above other bands. And sure, I'll go through and I'll listen to their whole discography, and then I'll enjoy it, and then I'll exhaust myself, and I'll go to some other things. But then, eventually I'm going to go back and be like, this part, that was a genius part. That was an amazing thing that was done there. And one other sort of just element of interest as well is artistic interpretation too. Subjectivism is really important. Interpretation, like how we understand art as it applies to us in our situation. And I think that interpretation is a very existentially valuable sort of experience. And that's another thing. It's hard to see how something like that would be exhaustible as well. That I could understand a piece of art in a finite number of ways. Because if my life goes through infinite revolutions, then it seems like there's eventually an infinite number of ways that I could understand a piece of art and apply it to my own life. So.
Are you muted, Than, on purpose, or?
No, I'm just stupid.
Okay.
We're at an hour and 15, so we got 1, 2, 3 more problems left. Let's go.
And memory or consistency. I think that this is something really interesting to consider. We are told that in some sense, again, I don't care if you want to argue for a spiritual body, our physical body, or just a soul or spirit kind of floating up there, which I think that one is the most problematic one. So for this, let's imagine we're in some kind of a body.
I too would agree the most problematic version of heaven is that we're just this disembodied spirit, because scripture attests to
a resurrection. I don't think there's any reason to think that that we're not going to be physical in heaven. But
yeah.
Of a bodily form, we are told that we will be able to recognize other people. That's why people love the concept of heaven. When they lose a child and they've convinced themselves this child has gone to heaven, they now want to live their life in a way that makes sure they go to heaven so they can be reunited with that child. Well, what does that mean, right? What is that going to look like? Here's a question. Will you still have your memories from this time on earth in heaven? I doubt it. And here's why. Once again, that verse in Revelation provides us with so much ammunition. There are no tears, death, sorrow, or sin. How much sorrow do you have when you think about your life? You might have the best life ever. You might have every single thing that provides you with meaning and purpose and beauty in your life. And I bet when you think through your memories, you are filled with sorrow. And then again, whatever age you are as you're listening to this.
Yeah, so we can pause this here.
I have something. I'm hit it red hot on this, which is
okay. You guys talk. I'll be right back. I'm gonna grab a book that I think is pertinent.
Okay. It doesn't seem to me to be the case that memories can be understood univocally as either entirely sorrowful or entirely joyful. It seems as though memories include a variety of possible emotions of which are experienced simultaneously, or sort of like a symphony of emotions. So the idea that the sorrow of memories will ultimately be abolished, and what will be left is only what is good about it, right? To find the good in all things, if you will, is the imagery used by various saints throughout the patristics. It's like this idea that there are memories that we have that exist exclusively in negativity or exist exclusively in the absence of good doesn't seem to me to be true. So again, like, let's think of the example of the mother who's tragically lost her child. It seems to me like the memory of the child that she has is not the loss of the child simpliciter, it's the child's existence, which is a good, or the love that she shared for that child, which is a good. And all of that persists. So the completeness of the memory will not include the accidental property of sorrow. And I mean that in a philosophical sense, not some sort of nomenclature of accidental happenstance, right? But the accidental property of sorrow, or the accidental property of anger or frustration, these memories are perfected in full goodness to where only the things about them that are part of the edification, part of the heavenly state, part of the glorification state are remembered. So there is nothing about us or nothing about those memories fundamentally that must be deleted. Instead, what is deleted is the perspective of which brings the pain and suffering. And that is not a necessary part of us. That's an accidental part of us that will be abolished.
And
Idol Killer says, being healed will see the sorrow cease. the memory remains.
I want to read a C.S. Lewis quote. This is the first thing that came to my mind when I heard this, and I think it really touches what Christian just said. From The Great Divorce, it says, "They say of some temporal suffering, no future bliss can make up for it, not knowing that heaven, once attained, will work backwards and turn even that agony into a glory. And of some sinful pleasure, they say, let me but have this, and I'll take the consequences, little dreaming how damnation will spread back and back into their past and contaminate the pleasure of the sin. Both processes begin even before death. The good man's past begins to change so that his forgiven sins and remembered sorrows take on the quality of heaven. The bad man's past already conforms to his badness and is filled only with dreariness. And that is why at the end of all things, when the sun rises here and the twilight turns to blackness down there, the blessed will say, we have never lived anywhere except in heaven, and the lost, we were always in hell, and both will speak truly."
C.S. Lewis is spitting.
Yeah.
This is a really good book to read. This is Eleanor Stump. You guys, oh, there you go. The Image of God, Problem of Evil, and the Problem of Mourning. Really recommend reading that book too, because it kind of hits on that topic. But
and I would say one quick thing on memories as well is that I think Christian's right about the memories being perfected and changed. And I think too, that's where I think the defeat of the evils within those memories comes in. And here's an example from my own life of where this has actually happened. And I don't see necessarily that this is inapplicable to other instances as well. So I have OCD. So I have dealt with OCD my whole life. And one of the there's many different kinds of OCD, but one of the particular kinds that I've dealt with is sort of an ethical related OCD, where I sort of feel guilt tripped into doing good things because I want to be a good person. But then if anything, even if it's not necessarily good, if anything is framed as being good, then I feel compelled to do it. So growing up as a kid, there was a stuffed animal, Clifford the big red dog, that was like 3.5, 4 feet long. It was like as big as I was at the time. And I freaking adored this thing, right? I thought this was like the greatest toy ever. And I like kept him at the foot of my bed, loved this thing to death, right? And then probably the time I was 7 or 8, my dad comes in and he's like, hey, so there is a charity or a drive or something for pregnant mothers who do not have the money to get their kids things like stuffed animals and stuff like that. And so would you like to, and we were thinking that you might want to potentially think about giving away the Clifford stuffed animal, right? And he was not forcing me into doing this. It was just an open option. But my OCD, which I didn't have a name for it at the time, but it clicked in and I'm like, I didn't want to do it. I definitely didn't want to do it. But I felt like I had to. And so I gave that stuffed animal away and it tore me apart. I mean, for like 3 years, as long as it could, until I was like, you got to get over this. It's a stuffed animal kind of thing. But I had minor, small childhood trauma around my mental illness at that stage of my life, because I had been basically forcefully coaxed by my anxiety into doing something I did not want to do. And that was a terribly difficult and painful memory for me for years. As silly as it sounds, that was the way that it was. Until recently, when I was, reflecting on it, I say recently, probably past 2 to 3 years, when I was reflecting on it. And I was thinking about the instance and I was like, okay, I didn't want to do that at the time, but I did do something good. I mean, I did give a stuffed animal to a child who would not have otherwise had one, that hopefully meant something to the degree of what it meant to me. Hopefully it meant that to him. And so I did do something good. And even though I coerced myself via my mental illness into giving that stuffed animal away, I'm sort of retroactively taking a stance that even though I didn't want to do that at the time, that I'm actually glad that I did that. Not because of the mental illness or because of me coercing myself into doing it. I'm glad that I did that because I was able to love someone who did not have something, and to really show them care. And in a better moral state that I am in now, I look back and I'm like, that is the choice that me now, would have wanted me then to make. And so now that memory is in the process of the evil being defeated for me, where I now look back at that, and a memory that once brought me trauma and difficulty now brings me some semblance of life, because I'm like, that was a time when I was able to be good to someone and love someone. And that is just a small example, but that is just to say that it's not like memories sit in a fixed or static state of this will always bring you pain, right?
Yeah.
They may contain things that are painful, right? But just as in a book, as you're reading through a book, there might be events that are very painful for the main character. And at the time you agonize with that character. That doesn't mean that later on that won't be converted or changed in the end to a point where you look back on to that as a major point of transformation.
First of all, great story, phenomenal story, and well said. I didn't have a Clifford Red Dog, and now I'm sad. I would have loved that as a kid. But there is something. There's an interesting idea there, which is if we can confidently say that the smallest scratch can be properly healed and rejuvenated by the most insignificant kind of medication or treatment, it seems to follow that even the most significant scratch or scar or defect could be plausibly healed in the same way by the most significant kind of medication or treatment. And if we just take grace and glory and goodness to be the most significant kind of medication, it seems like what is not desirable and what hurts us cannot overcome such a medication in the same way that the tiniest cut can't overcome the most insignificant bandage that your mom gives you. So.
All right. I'm just trying to get us through this. I'm trying to coach us along.
Honestly, just jump it forward a little bit. Like
we got problem 5. Let's go to 6.
We cannot be able to have these memories. This same previous existence, right?
Okay, so we already kind of covered that. Okay,
yeah, we've covered this.
Here is 6.
Right. So I'm going to, again, major in the majors here. And let's just say that belief is what gets you there. Let's look at John's gospel, believe and be saved. I tell you these things so you can know. And
I think all of us would agree that propositional belief is not what gets you to resurrection, right?
Correct.
I think we would all agree that the biblical definition of faith.
Pluralist Kyle does not think that, no.
Oh, you're okay. Well, you're okay. So, besides that, okay. Besides any
Christocentric Christian doesn't think that either. So
yeah,
right. I think it's a loyalty to God that gets you there. Believing loyalty, like what Hebrews talks about. Ironically enough, I think Hebrews is the best book that helps us understand what biblical faith is. But anyway, I think we'd all agree it's not propositional assent. Okay,
right.
And be assured, right? Believe and be saved. You made it. You're there. You're in heaven. However, there are layers to heaven. There are different mansions. There are different levels of crowns that we can earn for ourselves based off our moral acts here on earth. And this, again, is we have to put aside that some people think it is our works that will get us to heaven. Let's just assume, however it happens, the people that make it to heaven, make it to heaven. Think about the layers of unfairness that are going to exist in heaven. What is the point of a physical reward in heaven if you can't feel better about it than what someone else has? Like, think about this for a second. There's no suffering in heaven. There's no sadness in heaven. Then the person here who did not achieve this, they don't know what they're missing. They can't comprehend that. And the person who has this has no reason to enjoy it more than the person down here. Like, do you guys understand that? There's often the verses about the gnashing of teeth. There's one interpretation of the concept that this.
Okay, so is he saying there's unfairness in heaven, but then also saying like what's the point of that? What's the point of that if like let's just say James has a mansion and I have a hut. And is he saying like that's unfair, but what's the point of that? Because I'm not suffering because of his mansion and my hutness or something like that? Because if that's the case, like there's absolutely nothing wrong. Go ahead.
It seems to imply that the existence of disparity must necessarily follow with the existence of some kind of injustice. And I'm not sure that follows. I think there is such a thing as righteous disparity.
Right. Well, I'm also just like, I don't agree with that. I don't see any entailment there. But
you're good.
The other thing that it seemed like he was saying was like, without that, if that disparity. Because he was talking about like, well, what's the point? Like, if I'm not going to, let me actually just bring it up again and make sure I heard this right. Really,
maybe we should just rewind it 30 seconds. Yeah, that was.
Well, I want to. Okay, but yeah, I just want to briefly say that I think that there's cases where actually righteous disparity can bring joy, right? So I can think of instances in my life. Well, actually, here's an instance that's relatable to people, right? So there is a disparity between me and professional hockey players. So I'm obviously a big hockey guy. There's a disparity between me and them, right? And they have.
Right, there is.
Shut up, Chris. No, I'm kidding. There is a disparity between me and them, right? They're much more physically skilled. They're much more mentally abled in that particular area. And so, there's obviously a disparity there, but I think it's relatable to people who are fans of sports in general. That when there's that one player that is super good, that he finally makes it and gets the championship, you are super ecstatic despite the disparity. You're like, that guy deserves it. He deserves it. You're not disappointed at yourself that you're like, oh, what do you mean I don't get a Stanley Cup? That's not fair.
The problem is not when people earn it. It's when they unjustly get it, which is the opposite of what occurs in heaven, right?
Exactly.
Right, exactly. That's what I was going to say.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. I think this applies in like obvious moral cases too, that there's people that it seems to me that I admire as moral exemplars in my life that I look upon, and even though I strive and may not be like them, at least not in this life, that when I look upon them and see them get their due, I'm ecstatic at the fact that they are getting what they deserve. And I'm not mad at myself either, because I'm like, well, look, I'm not that good. I may be striving, but like, I'm not that good. I don't deserve those things because I haven't done those things. And that's okay. Like, I don't think that that's an object that's going to put me in misery. The fact that I don't deserve those things, that'd just be irrational.
Right. The example I was going to give is just like, imagine James decided, for those that don't know, like I'm a hobby bodybuilder. I don't look like it right now because I got surgeries going on for the last year, but like, let's just say I'm getting back in shape. And then James decides that he's going to take up bodybuilding out of nowhere. And he just happens to have like really nice genetics. And he actually becomes like the Mr. Olympia in like 2 years, right? I like the sinful side of me might just be like a little jealous and all that other stuff. But at the end of the day, like, I'm like, heck yeah, dude, like you put in the work. Let's go. Like, we're going to the top together. Like, right. It just, that disparity does not necessarily entail suffering on my end. Right. Especially like if my soul has grown to the point that I'm not going to be jealous or anything like that, I'm just going to celebrate James's victory with him and enjoy it on his behalf as well. So, but I do want to just rewatch this a little bit because I had a hard time understanding what he was saying. So,
be saved. You made it. You're there. You're in heaven. However, there are layers to heaven. There are different mansions. There are different levels of crowns that we can earn for ourselves based off our moral acts here on earth. And this, again, is we have to put aside that some people think it is our works that will get us to heaven. Let's just assume, however it happens, the people that make it to heaven, make it to heaven. Think about the layers of unfairness.
I will also just say briefly, I know that we sort of listened to this before, I'm not willing to put aside that whole conversation about works. I mean, presumably it's the case that whatever someone has in heaven that's distinct, they have on the basis of earning it in some way. And we could just explicate that as works. So I think by putting that aside, you've almost begged the question. It's like, what happens if there is unjust dues in heaven? And that seems to be contradictory. I don't know. I don't think we should just assume that if we don't assume that and we do incorporate the works theology, I think we do have a plausible justification for the discrepancies. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah.
The point of a physical reward in heaven, if you can't feel better about it than what someone else has. Like, think about
pause. Okay. You can't feel better about it in relation to what somebody else has. Is he saying maybe I just completely misunderstood this. It's like, what's the point of me having this better thing if I can't feel better about the fact that somebody else doesn't have it? Like,
right.
Did I just hear that wrong?
Yeah. I mean, like, and again, it's just like,
why can't I be prideful in heaven is the question.
Like, what? Like, how morally depraved do you have to be? Like, I hope I'm misunderstanding it. Like, I'm gonna like, but I mean, if that is really what he's getting at, like, how morally depraved do you have to be if the only way you can enjoy something is if you know other people don't have what you're enjoying? Like, that's like, and that's what makes me think I have to be misunderstanding him in some way. When he says that.
So it might just be the fact. It might be a misunderstanding, but I think what I'll just say is, there's a lot of stuff that I enjoy being able to deadlift 500 plus pounds But that's not at the expense of like knowing that you guys can't do that. I just enjoy doing it because I earned that strength, right? And like
I can do it, just so you know. It's not that I just choose not to, but I could if I wanted
to. But like, you get what I'm trying to say. It's like, I'm not doing it because I just want to be better than you guys. I'm doing it because, and I don't think that it makes me better than you either. Let me just make that.
I mean,
clear
it does, but it's good that you don't think it. So,
but like, I do that because I just enjoy doing it. I enjoy chasing those feats, right? And in the same way, like, all of you guys are better than me at something, but you're not like enjoying that, and you're not chasing that just so you can be better than me, right?
Well, here's an interesting objection to what he's saying. If it's the case that heaven needs to be totally egalitarian in every sense, think of like Michael Jackson, right? Is it the case that we would all have to have the singing ability of Michael Jackson? We couldn't sit and listen to Michael Jackson have a special gift of being able to sing incredibly well, and the only way that this would function is if we all would be able to sing Thriller in perfect pitch. It's like, I don't know. This objection doesn't seem to work for me very well.
Right. The other thing I'm just going to say is, if I'm picking up on what he's putting down, just because Garb or you or Christian or Kyle has a huge mansion, that doesn't mean that I'm going to be living like a homeless person on the earth either. Right. Like, for all you know, this language of disparity and mansions and all that other stuff, if we're just going to take this literally, which I don't think that's necessarily what's happening here, but if we just even take that literally, just because you have a mansion doesn't mean that I have a hut, right? Like, it doesn't mean somebody's living uncomfortably either.
You could have a modestly sized trailer.
Yeah, or whatever it is, right? And I'm going to be happy with it.
Look at Muscle Man. He lives in a trailer. He's got a great life. What's going on here?
That's true.
I know millionaires that live in a van, right? It's like, so
yeah, happens no sadness in heaven. Then the person here who did not achieve this, they don't know what they're missing. They can't comprehend that. And the person who has this has no reason to enjoy it more than the person down here. Like, do you guys understand that? There's often the verses about the gnashing of teeth.
I don't know. I don't understand that. Like,
yeah,
again,
I don't get his argument. It's maybe we should just play through this one.
The argument to me seems rather clear. He's just saying that unless we can express pride in what we've done or express desire in what we haven't, heaven wouldn't make any sense. And that makes sense if you're looking at it from a sinful perspective. I mean, honestly, that's the response I have an inclination towards.
And I think too, at least from my perspective, like, there's plenty of space for both of those, right? That we can express pride and joy for what we've done on our journey with Christ, to say, like, we once were in a state of moral disillusionment and far away from God, and that now me and God together conjoined have, gotten to great places, right? And then also to say, like, even the things like, I think the process of theosis continues past our moral perfection. And so, I desire to be more and more like God, more and more indistinguishable from him in his actions and his ways. And even mundane things, I say mundane with quotes, like, oh, I desire to be a better guitarist, or I desire to, get totally shredded, or, stuff like that. So even assuming even taking on his assumptions, I don't think that it's obvious that heaven is devoid of those things.
Yeah.
Is this the last one? Are we done?
No, I think there's one more.
Oh, okay.
So I just want to say this. Idol Killer says, I'm going to be like Kato and living in Dan's guest house for eternity. Here's something. One, I don't think I'm going to be at that big of a deal in heaven. I think there's going to be people that have done way more for the kingdom than I will ever hope to do. So I'm going to be happy if I get a hut. I'm going to be happy if I just live outside and get to enjoy the guest house of other people. But if I do get a mansion, I'd imagine that my morally perfected self is going to just be like, everybody can stay here. I don't care. Callum, oh, that's funny. Callum says, listening to this while incline benching. That's some really good stuff. Okay. Let's pull this up again. And I just mind shift. If you see this, I'm so sorry that I'm constantly pausing on like very unflattering screens of you. I'm not doing
I
this
noticed
on purpose.
that. I wasn't going to
Look,
say.
I'm not doing this on
blood
purpose.
all the way. Like the beard is impeccable, so it doesn't matter where
You're
you.
a beautiful man. You're a beautiful man.
looks great, yeah.
I'm not doing this on purpose. All right, I just want to finish this on the off chance that I just want to listen a little bit more on the off chance there's something we're missing here, and then we'll go to 7.
There's one interpretation of concept that this is actually for the believers in heaven on everything in heaven that they will lose out on because they didn't do what they were supposed to on earth. That's where the disappointment comes from, because there is this supposed class system in heaven, and you only get the 70 years or whatever it is on earth to develop what it's going to be, and then bam, now you're stuck. So what happens about the unreached people group? They get reached, and there's an 80-year-old man in the tribe, and he hears about Jesus from some missionary, and he accepts it right there, and he does one good deed, and then bam, he dies. Now he's in heaven, no fault of his own. He's the
Okay, so real quick, I just think I think there's like a whole entire epistemic range of options on the table here just to answer that question, right? Like it could, like it, for instance, like the parable of the lady, not the parable, like the lady who gave the penny. I'm really bad at reciting scripture off the top of my head, but that's all she had, right? In the same way, like this person that's like an unreached person, but he heard the gospel and then he only got to do this one good deed given what he has. It's like, well, he did everything he could given what he could do, like, right? Like that's one way of cashing it out. And so,
but
if you give all you can, God will multiply it to something much greater. Is the
like,
sort of idea.
The point I'm trying to make here is like, I want to just exercise epistemic humility here and just say this. It might just be the case that we don't actually know exactly how God is going to cash out and deliver these different places of rewards to everybody. And it might just be the case that like, hey, God's going to reward us based upon these sets of circumstances. But at the end of the day, like we only have so much knowledge of what the reward's going to be like. And I'm perfectly content just saying, unconditionalizing and saying, here's what I know. God is perfect. He's just. And here are all these meta ethical systems of reward that we can like conditionalize on and just be like, okay, God plus this auxiliary meta ethical theory entails this. God plus this meta ethical theory entails this. And we can come up with all these different models that can make sense on the models themselves. But at the end of the day, they're just models. You get what I'm trying to say here? It's just like, I'd rather just take that epistemic humility route than just being like, this is exactly how it's going to work.
Yeah.
I'm picking up what you're putting down.
But like,
and I think too, like a sort of extension of what you said is like, he's taken on this whole notion of like class system and stuff like that. But I don't think that there is really much conclusively to be said from the biblical data anyway, like as to whether or not, there is this grand disparity or anything like that. And I think also too, like, I think it's, if you're valuing the sort of physical materialistic objects in heaven, then I don't know that you're the sort of person that would be in heaven yet, Like, I think that you would be probably more in purgatory because your aims are misaligned. You'd still be growing towards the state where you could be in heaven. Like, I think that seems more obvious to me because if I'm at a state where all I'm concerned about is what my neighbor has, as opposed to like, hey, I'm freaking on a path to, theosis, to be more like God, to be more participant in the things that God is doing. Like, that is the ultimate goal. That is the ultimate joy.
So I wanted to add a couple things. One is like, okay, so this thought experiment he just gave of like the guy who's like, I don't know, he's 80, he's been living in a tribe in, I don't know, the Congo or something. Missionary comes by, he converts, and then he dies. Boom. All right. So he had like maybe 15 minutes being a Christian. It's like, okay, but that doesn't mean that what factors into the rewards that he has in heaven are things like, it could be the things that factor into that reward are things that occurred before he became a Christian. Because I think we would say that generally humanity has some type of revelation, some type of moral intuitions, and based on how he followed, the natural law up to that point, like those can all be things that factor in. Second, I would point out that this person is assuming that the state that we enter heaven with, right, like the welcome package that we get when we roll into the kingdom of God, like that's what we're stuck with for eternity. And we just don't have any data to support one way or another with like that. It may be the case that like,
yeah, that's a good point.
I start here and then I go up and I get more authority as I learn or as I progress. Like that may be the case. It may not. Like we just don't have any biblical data about that. But yet this objector is assuming that that isn't what happens. And he's using that assumption for his argument. And then finally, I would just point out that this isn't even an objection against heaven. Like that's what really like confuses me so much about this video. It's like, if that's the case, I think of someone like Peter, everything he did in his life, like Peter the Apostle Peter, and like the tortures, or Paul, and like the tortures he went through and things like that. So if he gets like a really high position of authority for heaven, maybe it's forever, and then I can just never reach that. Like I'm pretty content to just be a street sweeper in heaven. Like I'm pretty fine with that, and like that still seems like it's a pretty great time. So as far as like objecting to the idea of paradise, like even if it was the case that some people just will never have access to the things that other people have, like that still doesn't undercut it being paradise. Like yeah.
All right, let's get to the final point, and then we can sign off here.
I think the number one point of all of them, the problem with paradise is that it's not real. It is a hypothetical trade. You are trading today, this life, these next however many decades you get.
Bag it up, boys. Bag it up. That's it.
Let me tell you something, Fan.
Wait.
That's a hell of an argument right there.
I want to hear what he says besides
okay,
that.
Finish it. Sorry.
Yeah.
I think the number one point of all of them, the problem with paradise is that it's not real. It is a hypothetical trade. You are trading today, this life, these next however many decades you get. The only thing that is guaranteed to you, because I don't care what you believe, I don't care how many near-death experience stories have convinced you, the only thing you can 100% know is that you are here now experiencing what you are experiencing, creating the life that you are creating. That's it. That's all you get. And you are going to trade that, the only sheer thing, for a completely hypothetical possibility. This robs you of your autonomy here on Earth. This robs you of the beauty of the finite. This robs you of the chance to really create for yourself a life that is meaningful now, that's meaning is wrapped into the fact that it will end. This is like a reverse Pascal's wager. What if you're wrong and you waste the only life you ever get? But Brandon, I mean,
there's a lot packed in here that's just like gish galloping through. He's
what if you waste your life?
You
waste your life serving others and not serving yourself by doing whatever you'd like to. It's
like the travesty,
the tragedy.
Yeah, who knows? Well, maybe I'll spend my whole service
let's reel it in real quick here.
I have to hand in my Christian card, by the way, because Christianity's dead after that response.
Yeah. But I mean, like to be fair though, I think like with like arguments is bad. I think we should scoff and laugh at this because this is garbage tier. Like this is like honestly, like I think we should be able to scoff and laugh at garbage tier arguments. Like so up to this point, he's like, all right, I'm just gonna grant that, like all Christian doctrine, all that, and I'm gonna explain to you why paradise is impossible. Paradise can't work. And then his big thing is by just contradicting that initial thing that he was supposed to grant me. Like that's the big zinger. It's just like this question begging assertion that it's all wrong. Like
it's a question begging argument. You're not, if you're trying to talk to believers and show them what the problem is with heaven, you're not going to convince them by telling them that it's not real. It's pointless. Like that's that's end of story. Like book closed. That's the whole issue with that last objection.
Yeah, and like so a significant portion of his argument there is like, well, you can't know with 100% certainty. I was like, okay, but like with most things in life, you can't know with 100% certainty. So like when I committed my life to live with my wife, like I didn't know with 100% certainty that it would be 100% a banger. Like it still could go completely wrong, right? Does that mean I should never like love another person because it could be the case that I'm wrong, that thinking this person's a good person to spend my life with, and miss out on all of that just because there's this Cartesian skepticism that maybe I might be wrong. Like I mean, and this is like the epistemic issues in just this one comment. Like we could do a 2-hour video just on that.
Right.
I'm sorry, I'm like ranting.
No,
I'll let somebody else say. Yeah. Like,
I think there's things we can hit on too, because like earlier he said like this robs you of autonomy. My question is like how, right? I'm the one choosing to live my life like this in light of the fact that I believe the Christian story, right? That whole entire point is that my belief in heaven, my action, and how that guides my actions, right? My whole belief in the Christian story and how that guides my action presupposes my autonomy in the first place to do that. There's other stuff he said. I really want to replay that part. That's that part because there's a lot of stuff.
After that, I have something to say. Just
finite. This robs you of the chance to really create for you. That's it. That's all you get. And you are going to trade that, the only sheer thing, for a completely hypothetical possibility. This robs you of...
Okay, so I don't think it's a completely hypothetical possibility. I think there's a high probability that this is the case, but...
More plausible than instigation.
This robs you of the beauty of the finite. This robs...
How?
Oh yeah.
Right? Like if anything, I appreciate the beauty of the finite more. Like, for instance, I appreciate suffering more than I would if heaven wasn't a real thing, right? Like the fact that I can suffer in this life and choose still to be faithful to God in spite of that suffering, I see that as an opportunity to love God, even like love God in a way that I might not get to love God in the eschatological world, right? Like there's so many things that make that this actually, I think, points to the complete opposite of yeah.
So, oh wait,
robs you
Christian
of
had something he wanted to say, didn't he?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I just had a funny analogy. So imagine you buy a puzzle and you're sitting down with a friend and you're both kind of trying to figure out how to do the puzzle, and you finish the puzzle to the best of your ability and you say, hey, can you check my work, see if there's any pieces that I put in the wrong place? And they give you a bunch of ways that maybe you put piece A and piece in slot B or whatever, and they just keep moving it around, but they just go, but the real problem with your solution, this puzzle is not real. And they take the puzzle and they throw it across the room. Right? I think we just entered into throwing the puzzle across the room territory where we're no longer having an internal critique of how the puzzle is or is not solved properly, or how it is or is not incomplete or incoherent. And now we're just saying the puzzle doesn't exist, man. Atheism is true, man. Christianity is false, man. And those don't seem like appropriate ways to reach out to either believers or atheists, because either they already agree with you and there's no reason to talk to them, or they don't agree with you and this isn't an argument against their position. It's just a presupposition.
Well, he does present it later, like very soon, as like a reverse Pascal's wager, right? But I don't even think that holds up, because I think we have enough data to point to the probability of like some kind of afterlife being true. And I would argue that it's the Christian story that's the most probable. But let's just say like you do want to do a reverse Pascal's wager type thing. It's still going to assume some sort of meta-ethical theory. Like if you want to assume like some kind of hedonistic theory, then maybe this holds. But I think if you adopt like a virtue ethicist framework, what are you really sacrificing? I don't think you're actually sacrificing anything. I think you get more goods out of operating as if heaven is real, even if it isn't, on a virtue ethicist view, right?
And that's one of the problems that I immediately came to my mind is like there's a good bit of like sociological data that religious communities have better quality of life, like in virtue of their religious beliefs. So like the idea that I'm throwing something away here is so like this kind of reverse Pascal wager isn't even going to work, because I would be losing out if I didn't engage with these things just purely from the pragmatic point. But then there's this bizarre argument of like something only, and I think this is something that comes up a lot when it comes to arguments against like things in eternity, which is that, well, this only has value if it's finite, and that fundamentally doesn't make sense to me. Like if something doesn't have intrinsic value in and of itself, then it merely stopping after a finite amount of time would not bestow it with intrinsic value. And like so like I don't get that as like an argument. And if something does have intrinsic value, like it stopping, it seems like a bad thing. So it's just like that type of reasoning process. Like this is a cliche that I hear atheists use when it comes to like, oh, life is only valuable because it ends. Like no, if that's the only reason it's valuable, it was never valuable to begin with.
Right. Let's just see what else he has to say here real quick.
Of the chance to really create for yourself a life that is meaningful now, that's meaning.
Okay, well, again, that doesn't follow at all. I can believe in heaven and create a life that's meaningful to myself now. In fact, I feel like the life I've created for myself is more meaningful because in virtue of the fact that I think there's going to be an afterlife, and I'll get to like meet Jesus, and he's going to say, hey, well done, good and faithful servant. You gave up a 6-figure salary to start a ministry and get hated on by cringe lords on the internet and live at a poverty level. But it's okay. You sacrificed all of that because you love me and all this other stuff.
But fan, the problem is it's just not real.
It's not real.
So it doesn't matter.
But you get what I'm trying to say, right? Like
it's not a meaningful life. It's not real.
Is the rest of this him repeating the same thing, or is it going to be more?
I just want to see what like he's saying a lot of stuff. That's why I'm just going and pausing here, because he's saying a lot of stuff really quickly.
Create for yourself a life that is meaningful now, that's meaning is wrapped into the fact that it will end. This is like a reverse Pascal's wager. What if you're wrong and you waste the only life you ever get? But Brandon,
okay, if I'm wrong, I think we can all agree. If we're wrong about this life, if we're wrong about heaven, I don't think I've wasted my life, because I still chased the good my whole life. I've still spent the majority of my life trying to help people. Still spent the majority of my life loving my wife, loving my kids, all this other stuff. right? Like at the end of the day, my Christianity has shaped my moral walk and the way I operate in life. But like somebody might argue, like, well, you go to church every Sunday and you spend all this time, like you go to youth group and you invest in kids and all this other stuff. And it's at the end of the day, I'm like, yeah, I invested in those kids' lives. Some of those kids have like not good fathers in their life, and they need like guys that can help them like walk in life. Is that really a waste of my time just because I did that in a Christian setting and Christianity is wrong?
Yeah, and even if they don't have a special situation like that, which obviously that's very good, but even if they don't have a special situation like that, like what's wrong investing time in people, caring about people, spending time with people, caring enough about people to try and lead them in the right direction and lead them towards the good. Like what's wrong with that? Like I think you're right when what you said originally, that only if you have like some bizarre hedonistic meta-ethical theory or value theory that's the only reason you might think you're wasting your life. And if it's a question of value theory, it doesn't have anything to do with the afterlife at all.
Exactly.
I mean, still, eternity outweighs 80 years, 90 years, 100 years. How sad that you're forced to make that kind of a wager, that you would be willing to give up these decades of the most beautiful thing that can happen. Now, not everyone has a beautiful life, but for those of us that are lucky enough to live in a certain kind of first world country or have access to healthcare and a home and consistent food and shelter, then on top of that, be able to...
Do you say something, James?
Yeah, I was going to say pause it just because I want to make a little snide remark that like the most beautiful thing that can happen, like no king, like that's the issue, is that's what's Christianity. This crap we experience now, this is not the most beautiful thing that can happen. This is a shadow of the most beautiful thing that can happen. That's the only thing I wanted to comment there.
Fair enough.
Able to enjoy things like friends or family, to have individual interests and hobbies and passions. Just you're gonna chuck it away because someone instilled.
No, like I don't know where this is coming from, unless like he's critiquing like some independent fundamentalist Baptist cult. Like
this is like garbage cheer stuff. I mean,
yeah, I just don't know where this is coming from. I'm a Christian. My whole life is dedicated to my faith, but I still have hobbies. I still go to the gym. I still watch anime. I still play video games. I still love drinking whiskey and mead. I still love food. I still love sushi. I still like. I still am homosexual with the homies, right? Like,
that's a crazy thing to say.
Can confirm.
Yeah, I'd say can confirm.
Like,
you guys saw
that was supposed to be private, but go ahead.
Like the whole entire point I'm trying to make is like I'm not like losing out on anything, other than unless you assumed like Kyle just agreed with me earlier, some kind of hedonistic meta-ethical theory. Unless that's true, I'm not really missing out on any goods. Right.
Still enough fear in you that if you didn't surrender this life, you would not inherit the next. This is the greatest robbery.
And I don't think any of us are going to be like, we've made this choice out of fear.
Yeah, and there are people that do for sure, but I at least think that a lot of the people who would be, well, I can tell you, none of us would be. If you're scholarly interested, you probably aren't doing it out of fear. And if you're not scholarly interested, then you're probably not watching his video in the first place. So,
then, well, here's one thing. Whenever people like try to like, wait, I just saw this comment and it was funny. Food tastes bitter for theists. Why even eat?
I don't know. Can we put up B.S. Lewis's comment really quickly?
He does aim at fundamentalists as do a lot of us. They are a majority, and it's unrealistic that anyone could address every flavor of Christianity.
Fundamentalists are not the majority.
No, they're not.
Western evangelical fundamentalist Christians. Western evangelical fundamentalist Christians are a hyper minority of Christians across the world. They're even a minority of Christians inside of the States. Right, the majority of Christians in this, a vocal one, the majority of Christians in the States by denominational commitment are Catholics. I think at like 60 million. So it's not true that fundamentalists are the majority of Christians. And even within the label of fundamentalist, you're going to have different flavors that are going to affirm different kinds of things. So you're right to say that we can't address every single flavor of Christianity, but it should be the obligation of good and productive content creators to address the most formidable version of a Christian idea to their knowledge. Right. So I don't think it's fair to address a hyper literalized fundamentalist view of Christianity, especially when that view has been rebuked by, I don't want to say every serious scholar on Christian theism, but so many that it rivals the kind of consensus we see on scientific issues. Right. So it seems to me that if you want to make content for a hyper specific portion of the Christian community, I guess announce that. Say this is a video aimed at a super specific evangelical fundamentalist perspective of which I was raised in.
Well, that's kind of what I was going to say. Like, I think the two issues that most people have with this is, first of all, is when you just call the set of beliefs subcategorizable. I don't know whether or not you do this, but I'm just, you B.S. Lewis, I don't know if you do this or not, but just speaking in general, when you take the subcategory of fundamentalism and then just call it Christianity or Christians or whatever.
Real quick, there is one thing I just want to say.
Yeah.
Is I make a distinction between evangelical and fundamentalist.
Yeah.
I think that gets mixed in way too much and blurred. I think the lines are blurred. I think that fundamentalism is a subset of evangelicalism, but evangelicalism does not equal fundamentalism. Much like evolution is a scientific theory, but then there's all these subsets of evolutionary theory that are not identical.
Didn't I say fundamentalist evangelical? I thought I said
you did.
Oh, okay. I don't know. Yeah, I'm just saying on the off chance, like somebody just misunderstands you. That's all.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but anyhow, just to say that, like, I think that if one just equates, if one takes the subset of beliefs that belong to fundamentalist Christians and then calls out,
and even then some fundamentalists,
and then calls out that as Christians, I think that that's where the bother is. And I don't think that there's any issue at aiming at particular groups of people. And if you think that their beliefs are particularly damaging, I mean, I'm a Christian universalist, and I think that there are people who hold to the doctrine of eternal conscious torment that have dangerous beliefs. That doesn't mean that I'm going to direct my criticism towards every single traditionalist on hell or every single Calvinist, because not all Calvinists are universalists. And then I think the other thing is sort of what Christian was bringing up, which is just to say that if you are aiming at Christianity, it's probably best to aim for either a strong version of it. But I think for me, at least personally, I think the core issue is just whether or not you equate fundamentalism and the beliefs that go along with that and just call it Christianity. If the nomenclature is not there, I'm not bothered. I'm not going to be bothered if you're saying fundamentalists think this is wrong. But if you say Christians think this, and you mean, and you're referring to fundamentalists, but you're not calling out, but you're calling out Christians simpliciter, that I think that that point that's what is problematic to me. So.
Oh, okay. I misunderstood. I thought B.S. Lewis was giving a serious. If you look at his last comment, you'll recognize that he or she or they doesn't understand what we're referring to when we say fundamentalist. They really just mean to say that every single Christian is a fundamentalist. So.
Okay.
I just want to make the very quick comment that I don't even hear fundamentalists saying stuff like that would be this content would be applicable to. Like, I don't even think he's engaging with fundamentalism.
Right. So
sincerely, like I grew up in the South, and like what people would probably look at and be like are fundamentalist, like Southern Baptist churches. And like even the people in those churches, like, and I disagree with them, and they would probably be labeled fundamentalists. They would be scoffing at this, like,
right,
saying
exactly.
This doesn't address it. So like you're not addressing even fundamentalist. You're addressing a figment of your own imagination. Like that's what you're addressing in these videos.
And B.S. Lewis says, why not address the most dangerous as a priority? Again, I'm fine with that. I think all of us, right? I think all of us would contend and agree with you that we should be going after bad theology and dangerous theology. We're all with you there.
Of course.
The problem is when you address bad theological systems like this and treat it as a wholesale treatment of Christianity. That's the problem. That's, again, the equivalent of any of us going up against Richard Dawkins and being like, see, atheism is stupid, right? And then ignoring Oppie, ignoring Draper, and ignoring all these other scholars that actually have formidable defenses and formidable models of atheism and naturalism and all this other stuff, right? All we're saying is don't sit here and pretend like Christianity is stupid while attacking the stupid theological systems or a straw man. That's all we're saying. I don't care, bringing the heat. But yeah, we're gonna get heated about that kind of stuff, right? So, cool. You guys want to finish that video, or do you have any other parting
How
thoughts
many
for
minutes
2
are
hours?
less?
I just work here, so you tell me. No.
There are. I mean, there's like 2 minutes left of his last point. So
We can hear a little bit more. I don't
Yeah.
know. Like,
Let's just see what he has to say.
Yeah.
Of all time. Your life has been stolen out from under you, and you are willfully giving it away, thinking that you are the one that's coming out on top. This is the worst trade you can ever imagine. I am honestly
no, it's the best one ever.
so sad. I see these Christians with good intentions, worshiping, spending their time doing the things they think they need to do, denying themselves often, giving up their cross. The ones that are being consistent, and they're missing out. They're losing. They lose relationships because they hold too tightly. How many Christians have you heard whose parents won't speak to them anymore because they deconverted? Whose friend groups got destroyed because someone didn't believe like them anymore? People are putting a
Okay, again, all of those are not necessary byproducts of Christianity. In fact, if you look at a lot of the sociological data, a lot of those things are from extrinsic religiosity rather than intrinsic religiosity. Inspiring Philosophy has a lot of really cool research on this. I recommend watching that. But the long story short of it is, like, the more strict, like, legalistic and Christian nationalistic ideals that you see in America, especially, are results of extrinsic religiosity and a loss of intrinsic religiosity. In other words, people becoming less religious and more political with their religion rather than people actually being intrinsically religious. I really recommend looking at some of his research on that and looking at that data, because a lot of the stuff that he's describing here sounds to me like a byproduct of extrinsic religiosity in America being less religious than more religious. If anybody knows what I'm referencing there.
Yeah.
Yes.
putting a hierarchy of value on God and the afterlife, which is really selfishly here. What they're actually putting as a hierarchy is their future potential pleasure. It is more important for me to go to heaven than it is for me to treat my family well. Even Jesus says as much.
Oh, no, he did not just say that.
Because, so, like, he's equating with being a Christian that somehow is in conflict with treating your family well. And the reason that's in conflict with treating your family well is because some Christians disown their family members and they deconvert. That doesn't, like you were just saying, like, that doesn't follow. Just doesn't follow.
So, yeah, I mean, he went on to say even Jesus says as much. I'm willing to bet he's going to say if you do not hate your mother.
Right, when he thinks the end is actually coming, what does he tell everyone to do? It doesn't matter anymore, guys. Don't store up treasures here. Don't save for retirement. Don't care about your family. There's only one thing that matters now.
Whoa. He didn't say, okay. I will say, like Fan said, there is a pathway that you could take to maybe thinking that through the hate your mother and father, but the treasures in heaven does not go there. That's like the wrong passage to quote.
I didn't think it was possible for the arguments to get any worse, but I feel like if we keep watching, eventually he's just going to start screaming.
We'll just stop.
And I want to say too, I'm sympathetic to him because you can tell that he either has a lot of direct or indirect experience with Christians acting negatively toward him or negatively towards people that he knows and cares about. Or even just, you can be sympathetic to someone you've never heard about and just know that there are people out there who have had that experience. And I'm sympathetic to that. And I think it's good of him to be sympathetic.
Yeah, I'm very sympathetic to that.
Yeah.
That's why I'm so outspoken against bad theology.
Yeah. At the same time, I'm not sympathetic to the quality of his arguments. So while I feel for him very deeply and will shed a tear with him for the people who have endured that, I don't think that he's making a good argument, is what I will say.
I will equally shed a tear for the church in the areas like that, because I don't think that is good. Okay, well, we're at 2 hours and 10 minutes. You guys have any parting thoughts before I start closing this out here?
I have one.
Okay.
I am very impressed that we took a 29-minute video into a 2 hour and 10-minute response.
We
definitely aren't.
Good Lord.
We definitely are not at all long-winded. So
we have refuted this video with Cthulhu summoning complexity. We have
6
broken
ways
it.
Sunday.
Yeah.
Oh, I like your analogy. I like your analogy, James.
That's funny. All right, real quick, everybody. I'm gonna throw this link in the chat just in case. Just so everybody knows. Again, we are trying to raise some more support for Exploring Reality. I'm trying to do this as full time as I can, not have to do any side work, and just be able to afford not only just the software and the hardware, but like I want to afford the help of other people too. Like I have in my projections, I have hiring an assistant because I really do need one at this point. So like, and that assistant's going to help with social media, video editing, all that other stuff. And I also want to pay the scholars that are helping me. Specifically, I have scholars that are going to be helping me with writing courses, and they're going to be helping me like with my books and stuff that I'm working on. But specifically on the courses that I want to offer, I'm going to be offering those for free. And that means that the scholars are not going to be getting any time back in their, like anything back in their investment on that. And I want to be able to like help pay for
You don't
that.
have to pay me, Than. I love you.
You're not the doctor. It's Dr. Plantic, a bulldog that we're talking.
I know this
But
is
the whole entire
an
point here
honorary
is like,
doctorate from the wherever school of wherever.
but the whole entire point I'm trying to make here is I'm trying to raise some more support for Exploring Reality so I can keep delivering this kind of stuff for you. There's more that I do than just the online sphere. And if you're curious about that, you can check out my website. Or talk to me privately too. I do a lot of stuff working one-on-one with people. About 10 to 15 hours of my week is spent talking with people one-on-one about stuff. So just please consider helping out in that way. Every little bit helps. I really appreciate that. All right, guys. Thank you so much for jumping on last second. This was fun. I think we should do more last second streams like this where we just kind of blindly react. That was fun. Till next time, everybody. God bless. I love you all. Oh, and by the way, if you didn't know, the part 2 of my Mark and the Chaos Monster thing comes out tomorrow publicly for everybody else. I had some people watch it and they loved it. I'm really excited for you guys to see that. So
many people have been saying it's the best video ever released, anywhere. So
I'll catch y'all later. God bless.